Stories abound of American patriotism and bravery during World War II, fighting against Nazi Germany across Europe and making sacrifices at home to help in the war effort. But a new book details a very different and less well-known story from that time. Prequel, An American Fight Against Fascism, details efforts in the U.S. to have the country aligned with the Nazis, among other goals. MSNBC host Rachel Maddow is the book's author. She'll be in town tonight to talk about it at an event sponsored by Changing Hands Bookstore. I spoke with her earlier and asked how she came to find out about this story, in which, had things gone differently, things could have turned out very, very differently.
Yeah, it's surprising to me, even still. I've been working on this story for a long time now, but when I talk to even historians who work on this field and who work on this era, it's a really forgotten story. I ended up getting interested in this because I was looking at the American origins of Holocaust denial and really rabid anti-Semitism. We're seeing a very worrying upsurge of that in our era right now. And I was sort of trying to figure out what the kind of American prehistory was of that. And I stumbled into this story about a whole bunch of Americans being put on trial for sedition during World War II. I had never heard their story before, and I just became fascinated with it.
So when you think about this story, like how close were the people doing this to actually being successful at having America align with Nazi Germany?
It's a great question and a very contested one. If you think about it, almost definitionally, if the government puts you on trial for sedition, that means by definition, your effort to overthrow the government did not succeed,
right?
Because the government is still there to try you. So in that case, any sedition case is always about a plot or a plan or an effort that you can kind of say, oh, it never would have worked. It didn't really have a chance. And I think there's definitely some of that in the way this history has existed till now. But more recent scholarship has shown that a lot of these armed, super ultra right-wing paramilitary groups who were implicated in this stuff not only were very well armed and well trained and organized, but in a lot of cases, they actually had direct help from Nazi Germany.
Why do you think it is that people don't know more about this?
Well, when we look back at the World War II era, it is a great story to be able to say that we were the good guys over here and they were the bad guys over there, and we went over there and we fought them and beat them and it was over. And to a certain extent, that overall story is true. I think it is less comfortable. It's less the way we like to think of ourselves at that time, to acknowledge that there was a lot of Americans at the time here who either didn't want us to fight World War II, or more specifically, who wanted us to fight on the German side. But I do think it's really relevant, and I actually don't find it depressing. I find it heartening, because learning that there was a big, strong movement of that kind in our country means that it was beaten. It was defeated by Americans who fought back against it. And those stories, I think, that's kind of the real prequel that I'm alluding to in the title. Those stories about Americans who fought this back then, I think is just fascinating stuff.
Yeah, so what were those efforts like? Because as you say, we obviously know about American troops going to Europe and going to Japan and other places in Asia to fight World War II. But what were the battles like here to try to keep America aligned with the Allies and not the Germans?
It's the central question of the book, and it's a multivariate answer. But the short answer of it is that it was everything. It was mainstream politics. It was interventionists arguing against isolationists. When you had people who were beyond just politics and they were plotting the violent overthrow of the US government and the installation of a fascist dictator here, that is sedition. And dozens of Americans were put on trial for sedition, or were tried for being Nazi agents, for being agents who were working with the German government. But you also had stuff outside the government and outside politics. You had regular citizens who were working as journalists to expose them, as activists to infiltrate them, and then to tell law enforcement what they were doing. You had regular people who didn't see themselves as, I think, agents of the American government, who didn't see themselves as having an official role, who nevertheless played a big part in beating these folks back in the political sphere and elsewhere.
So how straight of a line do you draw from the fascists in America during the World War II era to what we are seeing now on the far right in American politics in 2023?
Well, it's not the same people and it's not the same dynamics. There's only Hitler is Hitler and only Nazis are the Nazis.
Right.
There's no contemporary analogy for that, of course. But when it comes to violent ultra-right movements that want to do away with democracy and that want to get Americans to do away with democracy, both through the threat of violence and also through really nefarious things like anti-Semitic propaganda and agitating. When it comes to those kinds of movements, you do see similarities in tactics. And so, when the German government was propagandizing in the World War II era, they had Nazi agents working with American members of Congress to send Nazi propaganda to American homes. I think you can see a little bit of a parallel, or at least an analogy, with hostile foreign governments propagandizing the American people and infiltrating, American political spaces and using American social media to try to turn Americans against our own system of government around some of our own election cycles. I think that's just true. I think there you had a lot of anti-Semitic propaganda. Now we're having a very troubling upsurge in anti-Semitic propaganda and in the targeting of other minorities. So it's different groups, but the fundamental tactics that groups use to try to get people to give up their democracy, they recur.
So your book, of course, looks back on history. I'd like to ask you just for a moment to look ahead. We, of course, have a pretty significant election coming up next year. You'll be coming to Arizona, which a lot of folks are saying is going to be really key for a lot of races, not just here, but in terms of what our federal government looks like. I'm curious, from your perspective, sort of in the national political press, what is the feeling about the role Arizona is going to be playing next year?
Arizona is in a singular place because of just the crucible that you found yourselves in around the 2020 election results. I mean, it is pressure enough to be a swing state in this day and age. But to be a swing state with not just the top of the ticket, but multiple races, statewide races and otherwise, be so hotly contested by people with such widely divergent ideological projects. To have the parties be so far apart and to have energies be so hot in the state. Arizona, I don't think anybody envies you in terms of what's going on in your politics right now, how hard it is to cover it, but also how hard it is to try to get the state to come out on what you see as the right side of these things. So Arizona, I think, is going to be right in the middle of it. And I think it also really matters that you had so many bipartisan, nonpartisan profiles in courage in 2020 in Arizona, people who did not necessarily take the short-term partisan or political interest that they were being pushed to follow, and instead they followed their conscience, people who faced up against threats, people who faced up against not just threats to themselves, but threats to their family, but who nevertheless found the strength to do the right thing. You've got a lot of heroes to look up to in Arizona. And you've got a lot of stories, I think, about moral courage to teach the country. And that, I hope, strengthens the spines of everybody involved in politics and everybody getting out to vote and thinking about becoming a poll worker or thinking about joining a campaign. Democracy is both under threat in Arizona and being defended by American heroes. And that's an electric time to be part of it.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. That is Rachel Maddow from MSNBC, among other things. Her book is called Prequel, An American Fight Against Fascism. Rachel, nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.